The diplomatic reception hall on Harmony Nexus Station sparkled with lights from a dozen different worlds. Corporal Minu Park stood at his assigned position near the east entrance, his rifle held at ease, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd. 6 months ago, he never would have imagined standing guard while insect-like aliens discussed trade agreements with beings made of crystalline structures. But here he was, part of humanity's first real push into galactic society. "Stay sharp, people," Captain Shin's voice crackled through Minu's earpiece. "The delegation arrives in 10 minutes. Remember your briefing. Do not approach them. Do not touch anything they bring. Do not even look at their sacred animals for too long." Minu suppressed a smile. The briefing had been 3 hours long, and most of it had been about what not to do around the. They were one of the most powerful species in the Galactic Coalition, and they had very specific rules about almost everything. Ambassador walked past, her formal robes flowing behind her. She looked tired. Minu didn't blame her. She had been negotiating with alien species for months, trying to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. It seemed like every day brought a new cultural mistake, a new misunderstanding, a new reason for some alien race to look down on the new humans. Corporal Park said quietly, stopping near him, "How are you holding up?" "Just fine, ma'am," Minu replied. "Long shift, but nothing I can't handle." Smiled, but her eyes were serious. "They are very particular about their cubs. If you see one, keep your distance. They consider them sacred. Some species have started wars over insults too." "Understood, ma'am." "I'm serious, Minu. Don't touch them. Don't approach them. Don't do anything that could be seen as disrespectful." She paused. "I know humans have a thing about helping animals, but these aren't like Earth creatures. They're symbols of culture. Treat them like religious artifacts." Minu nodded. He had read the briefing materials. There were genetically engineered predators that bonded with warriors. They were kept in a permanent state of blood covering as part of their cultural tradition, something about honoring their warrior nature. It seemed weird to Minu, but every species had their quirks. The refused to eat anything green. The L had 17 different ways to say hello, and using the wrong one could cause offense. Compared to all that, leaving some animals dirty wasn't the strangest thing he had seen. The main doors opened, and the delegation entered. Minu had seen pictures, but pictures didn't do them justice. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with exoskeletons that gleamed like polished metal. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for creatures so large. Their leader, whom Minu recognized as Council Representative Prime, wore a cloak made of some shimmering material that changed colors as it moved. Behind the main delegation came the handlers, each one leading a cub on a crystalline leash. Minu studied the cubs with professional interest. They were about the size of a large dog, maybe 70 or 80 pounds. 4 legs, a long tail, something like scales covering their bodies, and blood. They were absolutely covered in blood. It matted their scales, dripped onto the polished floor, and left a trail behind them as they walked. Other species in the reception hall moved away quickly. Some looked afraid, others looked respectful. None of them approached. The cubs themselves looked miserable to Minu's eyes. One kept trying to lick its paws, but the handler pulled the leash sharply. Another one was limping slightly, favoring its back leg. They made small whimpering sounds that reminded Minu of the stray dogs near his base back on Earth. Private Sora Lee, stationed near Minu, whispered through the comm, "Sir, is it just me, or do those things look unhappy?" "Stay professional, Lee," Minu replied, but he was thinking the same thing. The reception continued for 2 hours. Speeches were made. Agreements were signed. The seemed pleased with humanity's deference. Ambassador handled everything perfectly, showing respect without appearing weak. Minu was impressed. Diplomacy seemed harder than combat. Then the alarm started. Red lights flashed throughout the hall. The calm atmosphere shattered instantly. Minu's rifle came up as he scanned for threats, his training taking over. Security alert, a mechanical voice announced. Containment breach in Section 7. All personnel evacuate to safe zones. Security teams respond. The delegation erupted into motion. Their warriors formed a protective circle around their leader. The handlers struggled with the cubs, who were now pulling at their leashes and making distressed sounds. "What's happening?" demanded, running toward the leader. "One of the has escaped," Prime said, his translator making his voice sound hollow. "This is catastrophic. The cub is in its blood state. It will be confused, dangerous. We must seal the section immediately." "There are people in Section 7, protested. "We need to evacuate them first." "Impossible, they must not be harmed. If your people are in its path, they must defend themselves or flee. This is our way." Minyu listened to this exchange while moving toward the exit with his squad. Captain's voice came through the comm, crisp and clear. "All Marine units secure the affected sections. Rules of engagement. Do not fire unless absolutely necessary. They are very clear that their cub must not be harmed. Repeat, do not harm the escaped creature unless there is immediate threat to human life." "So we're supposed to just let it run around?" Sora asked. "We contain it if we can, avoid it if we can't," replied. "They are bringing their specialized teams. Our job is to keep people safe until they arrive." Minyu and his squad reached Section 7 within minutes. The corridors were empty. Emergency lights cast everything in a red glow. Somewhere in the distance, Minyu could hear something moving, accompanied by high-pitched cries. "Sounds scared," Minyu muttered. "Sounds dangerous," Sora countered. They moved forward carefully, weapons ready. Engineer ran past them, heading the opposite direction. "It's in Cargo Bay 3, gasped. "I saw it when I was checking the coolant systems. Thing charged at me. I sealed the bay door, but I don't know how long it will hold." "Good work," Minyu said. "Get to a safe zone." The cargo bay was just ahead. Through his helmet's sensors, Minyu could detect movement on the other side of the door. The sounds were clearer now, not roaring or aggressive sounds, whimpering, crying, the kind of sounds a hurt animal makes. "Command, this is Corporal Park," Minyu said into his comm. "We've located the escaped cub. It's contained in Cargo Bay 3 for now, requesting instructions." "Hold position," replied. "Teams are 15 minutes out, do not engage." 15 minutes. Minyu looked at the door. The whimpering continued. "Sir," Sora said carefully, "that really doesn't sound like an aggressive creature." "Yeah," Minyu agreed. "It sounds like a scared puppy." They waited, listening to the frightened sounds coming from the cargo bay. Minyu found himself thinking about his sister's dog back home, how it would whimper when it was scared during thunderstorms. The sounds were remarkably similar. This was going to be a long 15 minutes. The 15 minutes felt like hours. Minyu stood outside Cargo Bay 3, listening to the increasingly distressed sounds coming from inside. The whimpering had gotten worse, punctuated by sharp yelps that made him wince. "Status update," Captain's voice came through the comm. "The handler was injured trying to recapture the cub initially. He's in medical now. The other teams are having trouble getting through Section 5. There was a coolant leak that sealed several corridors. They're estimating another 20 minutes. "Copy that," Minyu replied. He glanced at Sora, who was watching the door with concern. Through his helmet's external audio, Minyu could hear the cub moving around frantically. Something crashed. The whimpering intensified. Then he heard something that made his decision for him, a high-pitched cry of real pain. "That thing is hurt," Sora said. "Sir, we can't just stand here." Minyu thought about all the briefings, about the warnings, about Ambassador's tired eyes as she begged him not to cause an incident. Then he thought about the sound of an animal in pain. "Command, the cub sounds injured. I'm going to assess the situation." "Negative, Corporal. Wait for the teams." "Sir, if it's injured and we wait, it might hurt itself worse, or damage the cargo bay and cause a bigger problem." There was a pause, then sighed. Fine, visual assessment only. Do not approach, do not touch, just look and report. Minyu moved to the control panel and opened the cargo bay door slowly. The gap widened, and he could see inside. The cub was in the center of the bay, surrounded by scattered cargo containers. It was even smaller than he had thought from the reception hall, maybe 60 pounds at most. Blood covered its scales so thickly that Minyu couldn't tell what color it actually was underneath. The cub was turning in circles, trying to reach its back leg, crying out each time it moved. It's got a leg injury, Minyu reported. Looks like a deep cut. All that blood is making it panic. Can you see how bad the injury is? Asked. Negative, sir, too much blood. The cub spotted Minyu and froze. For a moment, they stared at each other. The cub's eyes were large and amber-colored, filled with fear. It reminded Minyu so much of a frightened dog that he felt something in his chest tighten. Hey there, Minyu said softly, not keying his calm. You're okay, you're just scared. The cub made a small sound, almost questioning. Then it charged. Contact, Sora shouted, raising her weapon. Hold fire, Minyu commanded. He had maybe 2 seconds to make a decision. The cub was running at him, covered in blood, looking absolutely terrifying. Every instinct should have told him to shoot. But Minyu grew up on a farm. He had dealt with scared animals his entire childhood. And scared animals didn't attack like predators. They attacked like panicked creatures trying to get away from a threat. Their body language was completely different. This cub wasn't attacking. It was running toward what it thought might be help. Minyu at the last second. The cub tried to turn, slipped in its own blood and tumbled. Before it could get up, Minyu moved. He grabbed a cargo strap from the ground and wrapped it quickly around the cub's body, not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough to keep it from running. Sir, what are you doing? Sora asked, her voice high with stress. The cub struggled for a moment, then seemed to realize Minyu wasn't hurting it. The whimpering got quieter. It looked up at Minyu with those huge amber eyes. Park report, demanded through the comm. I've secured the cub, sir. It's not aggressive, it's injured and scared. You were ordered not to touch it. With respect, sir, it was going to hurt itself worse. Minyu looked down at the cub. Give me a minute. He muted his comm before could respond. The cub was shaking now, making small distress sounds. Minyu could see the injury clearly now that it was still. The back leg had a deep gash, and the constant blood covering had kept it from clotting. The cub had probably been in pain for hours. Minyu looked around the cargo bay. There was a maintenance station in the corner with a utility sink. He made a decision that he knew would probably end his career. Come on, buddy, he said, picking up the cub carefully. It was heavier than it looked, but not unmanageable. Let's get you cleaned up. The cub struggled weakly, but Minyu had a good grip. He carried it to the sink and turned on the water, testing the temperature with his hand. Lukewarm. Good enough. Corporal Park, your comm just went dead. Sora's voice came through on emergency override. What are you? Oh my God, sir, are you washing it? Yep, Minyu said, holding the cub under the water stream. Blood swirled down the drain, thick and dark. The cub made a surprised sound, then went still. Sir, they are going to lose their minds. That's a sacred. It's a hurt animal, Minyu interrupted, grabbing a maintenance rag from the shelf. And hurt animals need to be cleaned so you can see what's wrong. He worked methodically, washing away the blood. The cub had stopped struggling completely. As the blood cleared, Minyu could see that its scales were actually a deep blue color, almost purple. They were pretty, in a reptilian sort of way. More importantly, he could now see all the injuries. The leg wound was the worst, but there were several smaller cuts and what looked like burns from when the cub had scrambled through the coolant leak area. This isn't sacred warrior blood or whatever, Minyu muttered. This is just a cub that's been hurt and nobody's taken care of it. The cub made a sound, not whimpering anymore. It was almost like a purr or a chirp. It looked up at Minu with what he could only describe as relief. "Yeah, feels better without all that crud on you, doesn't it?" Minu said, using the rag to gently clean around the wounds. "We'll get you patched up. You'll be fine." "Park," Captain's voice was very calm, which Minu knew meant he was actually furious. "Tell me you did not just wash a sacred cub in a maintenance sink." Minu looked at the cub, now relatively clean and making happy chirping sounds. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "Park." "Sir, it was hurt. The blood was making everything worse. I cleaned it so I could assess the injuries properly. Standard first aid procedure." There was a long silence, then said in a very tired voice, "You just caused a massive diplomatic incident." "The cub seems happier," Minu offered. "You washed it like a dish." "More like a dog, actually." Minu grabbed a clean rag and dried the cub carefully. It leaned into his touch, making more chirping sounds. "Sir, permission to apply basic first aid. The leg wound needs pressure and probably stitches." "At this point, you might as well. You've already destroyed 3,000 years of tradition." Minu found a first aid kit and started working on the cub's injuries. The cub stayed perfectly still, watching him with intelligent eyes. When Minu cleaned the leg wound and applied pressure to stop the bleeding, the cub made a small sound but didn't pull away. "Good boy," Minu said automatically. "Or girl, I don't actually know. Either way, you're being very brave." "The team's just arrived," Sora reported. "Along with Ambassador, they're coming to the cargo bay now. Sir, they look really angry." "Yeah, I figured they would be." Minu finished bandaging the leg wound as well as he could with the supplies available. The cub tested the bandage carefully, then looked up at Minu and made a series of happy chirps. "You're welcome," Minu said. The cargo bay door opened fully. Warriors rushed in, followed by Ambassador and several handlers. They all stopped dead when they saw Minu standing there with a clean, bandaged, chirping cub in his arms. The head handler, wearing elaborate ceremonial armor, pointed at Minu with a shaking hand. You washed the sacred." "Yes, sir," Minu said politely. "It was injured and the blood was preventing proper treatment." "That blood is sacred. The crimson baptism is our most holy tradition." "The cub has a deep laceration on its rear left leg, multiple minor cuts, and what appears to be chemical burns," Minu reported. "It needs proper medical attention." Looked like she had aged 10 years in the last few minutes. Corporal Park put down the cub, slowly. Minu started to lower the cub to the ground. The cub made a distressed sound and clung to him, wrapping its front legs around his arm. Everyone stared. "It won't let go," Minu said unnecessarily. The handler took a step forward. The cub hissed at him, pressing closer to Minu. This was going to be a very long day. The conference room was packed with representatives from a dozen species. Minu stood at attention in his dress uniform, acutely aware that every eye in the room was on him. The cub sat at his feet, refusing to move more than 3 feet away from him. Every time someone tried to approach, it would hiss and press against Minu's leg. Ambassador sat at the human delegation table, her face carefully neutral. Next to her sat Ambassador Nam, who had arrived on an emergency shuttle specifically to deal with this situation. Was older, more experienced, and according to rumors, had once negotiated a peace treaty while under sniper fire. He looked remarkably calm considering the chaos of the past 12 hours. The delegation filled the entire right side of the room. Prime sat in the center, flanked by the injured handler and 3 elderly who Minu had been told were the Elder Council. They looked ancient, their exoskeletons covered in ceremonial markings. "This council has been called to address the unprecedented actions of human Corporal Minu Park," announced the coalition arbiter, a floating crystalline being whose voice sounded like. "The people have filed a formal complaint of cultural desecration. Corporal Park, do you understand the charges?" "Yes, sir," Minu replied. How do you plead? Minyu took a breath. Sir, I don't believe I committed any desecration. I provided first aid to an injured animal. The room erupted. Several delegates stood up, shouting. The arbiter's glow intensified and the room fell silent. The human calls our sacred an animal, Prime said, his voice cold. This alone shows his disrespect. With respect, said Standing, Corporal Park's native language is Korean. The translation may not capture the proper nuance. In human culture, calling something an animal is not an insult. Humans are animals. We consider it a simple biological fact. This caused another wave of muttering. The crystalline arbiter chimed loudly. Let us address the core issue, the arbiter said. Corporal Park removed the sacred blood covering from a cub. This is forbidden in tradition. The blood represents the warrior's bond with violence, with struggle, with honor earned through hardship. I understand that's your tradition, Minyu said carefully, but the cub was injured. The blood was preventing the wounds from healing. It was in pain. Pain is part of the warrior's path, shouted from his seat. The must learn to endure. It's a baby, Minyu said flatly. Bobbies shouldn't have to endure infected wounds. The silence that followed was absolute. One of the elder council members leaned forward. Her voice was softer than the others. You say it is a baby. You treated it as such. Yes, ma'am, it was hurt and scared. So I cleaned it, bandaged it, and calmed it down. That's what you do for young creatures in distress. Even dangerous ones, another elder asked. Especially dangerous ones, Minyu replied. A scared, hurt predator is more dangerous than a calm, healthy one. Basic safety protocol. Stood up quickly. Perhaps it would be helpful to provide context. Humans have a unique history with predatory species. We have domesticated many creatures that other species would consider too dangerous to approach. A holographic display activated, showing images from Earth. Wolves, bears, big cats. The aliens watched with clear fascination and horror as the images showed humans living alongside these creatures. Humans keep these in their dwellings, a delegate asked, incredulous. Some of them, yes, confirmed. We call them pets, they're family members. Madness, Prime muttered. Or adaptation, countered smoothly. Humans evolved on a planet where we were not the apex predator. We survived by learning to understand other predators, to work with them, to bond with them. Corporal Park didn't fear the cub because humans don't fear creatures of that size. We live with them. Dr. Bay, the human, stood up. She looked nervous but determined. If I may, I've examined the cub. The injuries were significant. If Corporal Park hadn't cleaned and treated them, infection would have set in within hours. The cub would have suffered severe complications, possibly death. Death is preferable to dishonor, said. Is it? Minyu asked quietly. You think your sacred cub would rather die in pain than be healthy? You cannot possibly understand. I understand that I heard an animal crying in pain and I helped it. Minyu's voice was firm. I would do it again. The cub chirped and pressed against his leg. There is another matter, the oldest elder said, her voice crackling with age. That has chosen the human. The room went silent again. That's impossible, said. The only bond with warriors. This has been our way for 3,000 years. And yet, the elder continued, the cub refuses to leave his side. It rejects its original handler. By our own traditions, this means a bond has formed. Prime stood up, his exoskeleton clicking. No outsider has ever been chosen by this is unthinkable. Perhaps, the elder said, it is unthinkable because no outsider has ever had the courage to care for as Corporal Park did. He showed no fear. He saw a creature in need and acted with compassion. Is that not what we teach our warriors? Courage, strength, and honor. We teach them to embrace struggle, not to wash it away like dirt. The cub suddenly stood up and walked to the center of the room. Every eye followed it. It looked then at the elder council, then back at Minyu. It made a long, complex series of sounds that seemed almost like speaking. "What is it saying?" asked. One of the handlers stepped forward reluctantly. "The language is complex, but it is saying it was afraid, lost, hurt. Then the human came. The human was not afraid. The human made the pain stop. The human was gentle." "Gentle," repeated, as if the word was foreign. "Gentle and strong," the handler corrected. "The cub says the human has the heart of a warrior because he did not fear to show kindness." Minyu felt his face heat up. He hadn't expected the cub to be able to talk, or whatever that was. The oldest elder made a sound that might have been laughter. "The has wisdom we have forgotten. We cover them in blood and call it honor, but perhaps we have confused suffering with strength." "Elder, you cannot possibly suggest." "I suggest nothing, I observe." The elder stood up slowly, her movements stiff with age. Corporal Park answered truthfully, "Why did you not fear the—" Minyu thought about it. "Honestly, it reminded me of my sister's dog. Same size, same body language when it's scared. I know how to handle scared animals, that's all." "That's all," the elder repeated softly. "He speaks as if befriending a predator is simple." "For humans it kind of is," said carefully. "We've been doing it for thousands of years." The arbiter chimed softly. "This council must make a decision. The claim desecration. The humans claim ignorance of harm. The itself has chosen a side. This is unprecedented." "There is a solution," the oldest elder said. "An old solution, rarely used. Corporal Park has been chosen by our most ancient laws. He must undergo the trials of bonding. If he succeeds, he becomes a warrior candidate and his actions are validated. If he fails, the bond is broken and the cub returns to us." "You want me to go through warrior trials?" Minyu asked. "Unless you wish to reject this choice." Minyu looked down at the cub. It looked back at him with those amber eyes chirping softly. It trusted him. It had chosen him. "What do the trials involve?" he asked. "Combat endurance wisdom tests," said. He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "They are designed for warriors. No human has ever attempted them. You would fail." "Maybe," Minyu said, "but I'm willing to try." Looked like she wanted to object, but put a hand on her arm. "The Prime must agree," the arbiter said. Prime was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Very well. The human may attempt the trials. When he fails, there will be no more discussion of his supposed bond." "And if he succeeds?" the elder asked. "Then the has chosen wisely, and we must accept a new truth about what it means to be a warrior." The meeting ended with formal documentation. As everyone filed out, the cub stayed pressed against Minyu's leg. Sora appeared at his side. "Sir, do you realize what you just agreed to?" "I agreed to try," Minyu said. "That's all anyone can do." The cub chirped in agreement. Captain approached, shaking his head. "Park, you have a talent for turning simple situations into international incidents." "Sorry, sir." "Don't be, the cub looks healthy, that's what matters." Paused. "Just try not to die during these trials, all right? The paperwork would be terrible." Minyu smiled. "I'll do my best, sir." The cub made a sound that almost seemed like laughter. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. The training facility on Harmony Nexus had been converted into a makeshift trial ground. Minyu stood in the center, wearing modified combat gear that they had grudgingly approved. The cub, who the human Marines had started calling Soap, much to his horror, sat nearby, watching everything with alert eyes. "This is highly irregular," said for the 100th time. He was supervising the trials, still limping from his earlier injury. "This should be covered in the sacred blood during training." "The cub is clean and healthy," Minyu replied calmly. "That's how it stays." They had been arguing about this for 3 days now. Minyu had stood firm. Soap got bathed every evening, wounds checked, proper food and water. The handlers watched this routine with expressions that Minyu couldn't quite read: disgust, fascination, maybe both. The official hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Before then, Minyu had to demonstrate his ability to work with Soap. The combat trials would come later, but first, they wanted to see if the bond was real or just a temporary attachment. Sergeant arrived that morning, brought in specifically to help prepare Minyu's testimony. She had been a K-9 handler for 8 years before joining the Space Marines, and she had worked with some of the most difficult military dogs in the service. "So this is Soap," said, approaching slowly. Soap watched her but didn't hiss. "May I?" "He seems okay with you," Minyu said. Knelt down and let Soap sniff her hand. The cub chirped softly and allowed her to scratch behind his head ridges. Smiled. "Good boy, you've got nice manners." Made a choking sound. "Thee is not a pet." "No," agreed, standing up. "He's a working animal, a partner. There's a difference. You humans treat war beasts like children." "We treat them like teammates," corrected. "There's a reason human military working dogs are so effective. We don't see them as tools. We see them as soldiers who happen to have 4 legs." She pulled out and showed footage of Earth military K-9 units. Dogs rappelling from helicopters, detecting explosives, tracking targets through difficult terrain. The dogs were clearly well-trained, highly effective, and working in perfect sync with their handlers. "These animals trust their handlers completely," explained. "That trust comes from care, training, and respect, not from fear or pain." "The way is different," insisted, but his voice was less certain. "Is it working?" asked bluntly. "How often do cubs die during training?" Was silent. "I read the records that were made available," continued. 30% mortality rate during the first year. Another 20% wash out due to behavioral issues. That's a 50% failure rate. The weak are culled, only the strong survive. Or, said quietly, "You're traumatizing young animals and calling it tradition." The hearing began at noon. The same conference room as before, but this time with additional observers. The 3 elders sat in their positions, watching everything with ancient eyes. The arbiter opened the proceedings. "We are here to determine if the bond between Corporal Minyu Park and the designated Soap is legitimate. Handler will present the position. Sergeant will present the human position." Stood up. His presentation was formal, full of references to tradition and sacred texts. He explained how we're raised in blood, how they learned to embrace violence, how only through suffering could they become true warriors. His voice was passionate, convinced. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then stood up. "I've been a military dog handler for 8 years," she began. "I've worked with Belgian, German shepherds, and even wolves raised in captivity for special programs. Every single one of those animals could kill a human easily. They're faster, stronger, and they have teeth and claws that we don't. But they don't kill us. You know why?" She looked around the room. "Because we treat them as partners. We feed them, we train them, we care for them when they're sick. We play with them. We give them affection. And in return, they trust us completely. They'll run into burning buildings for us. They'll take bullets for us. Not because they're afraid of us, but because they love us." Pulled up footage on the holographic display. A Marine and his military working dog playing with a ball during downtime. The same dog, an hour later, alerting to an explosive device and potentially saving dozens of lives. "This is what a real bond looks like," said. "Not pain, not blood, trust." "You speak of love," one of the elders said, "with animals." "Yes," said simply. "Humans love their animal partners, their family." Stood up. "This is weakness. Warriors must be hard." "Warriors must be strong," agreed. "But strength doesn't mean cruelty. My dogs were the most capable war animals in human service, and every single one of them was treated with kindness and respect." "Show us," the oldest elder said suddenly. "Show us Corporal Park's bond with the—" Minyu stood up, and Soap immediately came to his side. Minyu had been practicing with Soap for the past few days, using basic dog training techniques. The results had been remarkable. "Soap, sit," Minyu said. Soap sat immediately, looking up at Minyu with bright eyes. "Stay." Minyu walked across the room. Soap stayed in place, though his tail twitched with the effort of not following. "Come." Soap bounded across the room, chirping happily. The observers were silent, watching. Minyu went through several more commands. Soap responded to all of them perfectly, clearly enjoying the work. "Now watch this," Minyu said. He pulled out a small ball something engineer had made for him. He threw it across the room. "Soap, fetch." Soap took off like a shot, grabbed the ball and brought it back to Minyu, dropping it at his feet. His whole body wiggled with excitement. "Good boy," Minyu said, scratching Soap's head. Soap made happy chirping sounds and pressed against Minyu's leg. "He plays," an elder said softly. "The plays." "Of course he plays," Minyu said. "He's young. Young animals play. It's how they learn and bond." "Our do not play," said. "They train." "Do they enjoy the training?" asked. Opened his mouth, then closed it. "Soap enjoys training," Minyu said. "He gets excited when we start. He tries hard to do well, and when he succeeds, he's happy. That's what learning should look like." The oldest elder stood up slowly. Handler answered truthfully. "When you trained did it seem happy?" Was quiet for a long time. Then very quietly he said, "No, it was obedient but not happy." "And did it survive the first year?" "No, elder. It died during combat trials." The silence was heavy. "I had 4 before the current one," continued, his voice barely audible. "All died in training. I thought it was normal, necessary." "How many has Corporal Park lost?" the elder asked. "None, elder, but he has only had one and for less than a week." "A week in which the has learned, played, bonded, and thrived." The elder turned to Minyu. "Corporal, what is your goal with this?" "To keep him healthy and happy," Minyu said simply, "and to train him to work with me effectively, in that order. Not to make him a perfect warrior." "A happy, healthy partner is a perfect warrior," Minyu replied. "Fear and pain don't make good soldiers. Trust and teamwork do." The elder sat down heavily. "We have forgotten this. In our pursuit of warrior perfection, we have lost sight of what makes a true bond." "Elder, surely you don't suggest we abandon our traditions?" Prime asked. "I suggest our traditions have become corrupted," replied. "We turned care into cruelty and called it strength. The human shows us the truth we lost." Another elder spoke up. "The mortality rate was not always so high. I have read the ancient texts. Once our cubs survived at much higher rates." "When did it change?" asked. "When we decided blood and suffering were more important than the bond itself," said softly. Looked at Soap, who was sitting happily next to Minyu, tail wagging. "The cub does seem content." "He's more than content," Minyu said. "He's ready to work, ready to learn, ready to be a partner, all because he knows I won't hurt him." "And you would trust him in combat?" asked. "With my life," Minyu said without hesitation. Soap chirped and pressed closer to him, as if agreeing. The arbiter chimed softly. "The elders must confer. This hearing is recessed until tomorrow." As everyone filed out, approached Minyu hesitantly. May I touch the—" "Soap," Minyu corrected gently. "And yes, just let him sniff you first." Knelt down awkwardly. Soap sniffed his hand, then chirped and allowed himself to be petted. His hand shook slightly as he touched the clean, healthy scales. "I have never felt it like this," whispered. "So warm, so soft." "That's what healthy scales feel like," Minyu said. Soap licked his hand, and the handler made a sound that might have been a sob. "I killed them," said. "By following tradition, I killed my—" "You didn't know there was another way," Minyu said gently. "Now you do." Looked up at him with compound eyes that somehow conveyed deep sadness. Teach me the human way." Minyu smiled. Sure, first lesson, give him a bath when he gets dirty. Despite everything, laughed. The Elder Council chambers were different from the regular conference rooms. They were older, carved from dark stone that predated the station itself. Ancient symbols covered the walls, and the air smelled of something like incense. Minyu stood in the center of the circular room, Soap sitting calmly at his side. Around them, the three elders sat in raised positions, their ancient forms casting long shadows. Corporal Minyu Park, Elder said, her voice echoing in the chamber. The council has reached a decision regarding your bond with the... Minyu stood at attention. Soap sensed his tension and pressed closer against his leg. For 3,000 years, we have followed the tradition of the Crimson Baptism. We believed that only through blood and struggle could a true warrior bond be formed. We believed that suffering made both warrior and stronger. Paused. We were wrong. Prime started to speak, but another elder raised a hand to silence him. The mortality rate among our has been high for generations, continued. We accepted this as necessary. We called it natural selection, but Corporal Park has shown us that it was simply cruelty disguised as tradition. The human cleaned a cub that was frightened and injured, the second elder said. He showed no fear, only compassion. The cub responded not with aggression but with trust. In less than a week, their bond is stronger than bonds we take months to form. The question before us was whether the human committed desecration, the third elder said. We have determined that he did not. Instead, he honored the true purpose of the tradition, not blood and pain but partnership and trust. The room was absolutely silent. Therefore, announced, we recognize the bond between Corporal Minyu Park and the called Soap. By our most ancient laws, he is granted the status of warrior candidate. He need not complete the trials as he has already demonstrated the qualities we seek. Courage, wisdom, and most importantly, the ability to form a true bond with a... Minyu let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you, elders. Do not thank us yet, said, and there was something like amusement in her voice. Your actions have consequences. You have changed a 3,000-year-old tradition. The question now is what comes next. I don't understand, elder. Other warriors have been watching, the second elder explained. They have seen how your thrives, they have questions, they want to know your methods. I'll teach anyone who wants to learn, Minyu said immediately. Even knowing this will change our entire culture. Minyu looked down at Soap, who looked back at him with trusting amber eyes. If it means more survive and thrive, yes, that's worth any cultural change. Made a sound that might have been approval. Handler has already requested to study your methods. Others will follow. Within a generation, the tradition may look very different from what it has been. Will that be acceptable to your people? Minyu asked carefully. Some will resist, admitted. Some will cling to the old ways, but look at your healthy and content. Look at's previous dead before maturity. The evidence speaks for itself. Prime finally spoke. I was wrong to oppose this, I admit that, but I have a concern. If we change our traditions based on human methods, do we not become less? Do traditions define us or do our values? The third elder asked. We claim to value strength, honor, and the warrior bond. Corporal Park has shown all three. He is not, yet he embodies what we claim to pursue. Besides, added, the ancient texts speak of bonds formed through trust and respect. It is we who added the blood and suffering. Perhaps we are not becoming less. Perhaps we are returning to what we once were. The formal judgment was recorded and transmitted throughout the station. By evening, the news had spread to every coalition world with populations. The responses were mixed. Some called it heresy. Others called it enlightenment. But everyone was talking about the human marine who washed a sacred like a dish. 3 weeks later, Minyu was assigned to his first mission with Soap. A coalition research outpost had gone silent, and the rescue team needed scouts. Minyu and Soap were chosen to accompany and his own. a young cub that had recently started training using Minyu's methods. The outpost was on a jungle planet, hot and humid, perfect conditions for things to go wrong. The team moved carefully through dense vegetation, scanning for any signs of what had happened. Soap walked beside Minyu, alert but calm. Cub, who had been named Cascade, moved similarly beside her handler. Both were clean, well-fed, and responsive to commands. "Contact," Soap suddenly chirped, his body going tense. Minyu raised his fist, signaling the team to stop. "Soap's got something." "Cascade senses it too," confirmed. They moved forward cautiously, and the team followed. They found the research team alive but trapped by a collapsed structure. It took 2 hours to dig them out safely, with Soap and Cascade helping to locate trapped personnel and warn of unstable areas. "You saved lives today," the research team leader said as they prepared to evacuate. "Both of them." "They're good at their jobs," Minyu said, scratching Soap behind his head ridges. Soap chirped happily. The rescue mission made the news. Footage of the two working in perfect coordination, clean and healthy and effective, spread through coalition channels. More handlers started asking questions. Some came to Harmony Nexus specifically to observe Minyu's training methods. 6 months after the initial incident, Ambassador called Minyu to her office. She looked less tired than before, and she was smiling. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked. "Caused a diplomatic incident," Minyu offered. "Changed a civilization," corrected. "The Council has formally adopted new guidelines for care, regular bathing, medical attention for injuries, training based on positive reinforcement. They're calling it the Park Protocol." Minyu felt his face heat up. "They named it after me." "You're famous, Corporal. The human who looked at a sacred tradition and said, 'That animal needs a bath.' I just did what made sense." "I know, that's what makes this so remarkable." Pulled up a holographic display showing statistics. "Mortality rates have dropped by 60% since the new guidelines were implemented. 60%, Minyu. You've saved hundreds of lives." The elders made the decision, and the other handlers did the work. "You showed them it was possible." Closed the display. "The Coalition Council wants to meet with you formally. They want to discuss how human-animal bonding techniques might benefit other species." Other species? Turns out lots of coalition races use animals for various purposes: military, companionship, labor, and many of them treat those animals poorly, thinking it's necessary. You've started a conversation about whether there's a better way. Minyu thought about that, about how something as simple as washing a scared cub could lead to all of this. "Will you do it?" asked. "Will you teach other species?" Minyu looked out the window to where Soap was playing in the station's recreation area with Cascade and several other cubs. All of them were clean, healthy, and clearly happy. Was supervising, and Minyu could see him laughing at their antics. "Yeah," Minyu said, "I'll do it." The next day, Minyu was promoted to sergeant and assigned to a new position: Animal Partner Program Director. His first class had 30 students from 15 different species, all wanting to learn the human approach to working with animals. "The key thing to understand," Minyu told his first class, "is that animals aren't tools. They're not weapons. They're partners. They have feelings, needs, and personalities. If you respect that, if you care for them properly, they'll be more effective than any training based on fear or pain." A student raised a hand. "What if our traditions say otherwise?" "Traditions can change," Minyu replied. "They should change when we learn better ways. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." After class, Private Sora found him in his new office. "Sir, this is incredible. You're literally reshaping galactic culture." "I washed a puppy," Minyu said, signing off on training reports. "You did more than that." "Maybe," Minyu smiled. "But at the end of the day, Soap needed help. I helped him. Everything else just kind of followed." Soap, who had been sleeping under Minyu's desk, chirped in agreement. The official report filed with Coalition Command was simple. Mission: rescue escaped cub. Status: complete. Methods: applied standard Earth animal care practices. Results: cultural evolution, decreased mortality rates, improved understanding. Recommendation: continue program expansion. Note: Soap is due for a bath at 1800 hours. Captain read the report and laughed. Leave it to Menu to change the galaxy and still be worried about bath time. A year later, the Crimson Baptism tradition had been formally retired by the Council. Cubs were now kept clean, healthy, and properly cared for. The mortality rate had dropped to less than 5%. Warriors reported stronger bonds with their than ever before. When asked what caused this change, Elder gave a simple answer. A human Marine looked at our most sacred tradition and saw a scared, hurt animal that needed help. He didn't see religion or culture or politics. He saw a cub that needed a bath. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Minu never thought of himself as anyone special. He was just a Marine who liked animals and understood basic care. But to the Coalition, to the thousands of cubs who now survived and thrived, he was something more. He was the human who proved that compassion wasn't weakness. That care wasn't coddling. That sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is to wash away the blood and tend to the wounds beneath. And if anyone asked Soap, he would chirp happily and agree. After all, baths were nice, belly rubs were better, and his human gave the best head scratches in the entire galaxy. 3,000 years of tradition, changed because one Marine refused to let an animal suffer. The galaxy would never be quite the same. And that was probably for the best.